Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. And today's opinions will be about Divine Misfortune by A. Martinez. And I will admit, when I was reading this book, I was in the trashiest of trash moods, like I was not enjoying anything. And this book still made me laugh, still made me smile, and I still enjoyed it. So I do think it's a spectacular book, but I did notice a few faults in it, and it's not really the book's fault. It's the fact that I was in such a bad mood, I was going to notice faults. But because of that, I do have some negative things to say, but know that overall, I really, really liked this book. But Divine Misfortune is the story of Terry and Phil, a nice, normal couple, living a nice, normal life in a version of our world where the gods of yore are real, are still around, and are still meddling in the lives of mortals. But now there are rules. Gods can only meddle in their followers' lives, and followers have to agree to follow them. It's basically a contract. And so it's all very organized. You do offerings, and in exchange, like, the gods may or may not bless you. And Terry and Phil don't have a god, and they've always avoided signing on with one. Phil's always felt like he's got along great and fine without one, and Terry is directly opposed to the idea of letting a divine spirit interfere with people's lives. But when Phil is passed over for a promotion for like the dozenth time, he suggests that maybe they look into finding a nice, low-commitment kind of god. And when they find Lucky, the raccoon god of prosperity, he seems like the perfect fit. Until they find out that part of their agreement is that Lucky will be sleeping in their spare bedroom. Before they know it, they're embroiled in a divine conflict that should have been sorted out centuries ago, and relying on luck, their less than reliable god, and the help of a retired serpent god, and the power of love to survive forces that see them as inherently expendable. And overall, like I said, I really liked this book. It was amusing. It got a laugh out of me multiple times when I was not laughing at anything. It's sometimes, like, I'm talking about out loud chuckles, whereas sometimes it was more just a kind of laughs. It's got a really fun premise with a beautiful mixing of the mundane and the whimsical, the supernatural and the metaphorical. It has one of those vibes that it feels very much like this could be any neighborhood in America, but then add a splash of magic. The adventure to the collective unconscious was one of my favorite set pieces in the entire book. It was beautifully ridiculous, but it also felt like there was real thought and intention put into the absurdity. It did not just feel like, you know, someone pulling random ridiculous things out of a hat and throwing them all together. Like, it felt like everything that was there had a purpose to be there. It was just a slightly absurd purpose. And that's really true of the entire world building of this book. Like, there are probably dozens of lesser-known gods that pop up here and there, and they are lesser-known gods that really did exist in our world. Like, they are real mythology. You can go look them up. And I did pause to look some of them up because I didn't know who they were. I will admit a lot of them I did because mythology is one of my random things I love. But when I'd look them up, it almost always added a little bit of deeper layer, an extra layer of meaning to what was happening. So there was the silliness, but there was also the humor that is only going to make sense to you if you bother to look up who these gods are, or happen to already know. And, like, yeah, a lot of them are the kind of well-known-ish mythological figures that you will probably be like, yes, I get it, she's a Valkyrie, I got it, good. But it also feels just in general like the author really dug into the ideas here and really built a great layer onto the world we know. And it was one of those that felt like the changes the author made from our world made internal sense in this world. Like, I will admit, one of the things that popped into my head when I was reading this book is Lindsay Ellis has a great video where she breaks down the movie Bright, and one of her biggest problems with that movie, and one that I understand even though I have not actually seen the movie, I much prefer watching media criticism for media I have not actually seen or read. But one of her big critiques is that Bright has all these magical elements thrown in, and yet none of the rest of history seems to have changed around this magic, and that felt really inauthentic to her. And it popped up in my mind when I was reading this book. because I feel like this one did it so much better. This one, yeah, there is major magic elements added into our world history, but the way they're added sort of makes sense, and like the way like passing lines, like the which gods you're cursing by, and like the comments about Zeus doing that or Odin doing this, just sort of made it make sense in a way that you're like, yeah, I could see the exact same history happening, just with, you know, Zeus wandering through the story. And because of that, it felt a lot more authentic, and it felt a lot more real in many ways. And, like, I feel like this is a really big concept here, and it feels like it really could change the world absolutely dramatically, but at the same time, everything in it worked logically, so this world did not feel out of place. There was the ridiculosity of adding these, you know, what feel like antiquated elements into a modern world, but they work together like peanut butter and chocolate, things that logically you should not put together, but they worked. And the way the gods interact with humanity in here feels like it would both change everything and absolutely change nothing. And I think that was absolutely perfect for this, and that's part of what it's saying. And on that note, I just really love the way this book felt like it was directly addressing how much power and influence comes down to luck. And, like, yeah, some of it is a pretty straightforward theme here, but by introducing this concept of of what wasn't luck as much as the literal capricious desires of really fallible and sometimes downright shitty gods, it somehow drew attention to how much in our reality really is just luck. And I don't mean just like interpersonal moments, like, oh, this guy got the job and this guy didn't. Like, there are comments on like, how did the conquistadors take over the Aztec Empire, and it's just passing moments that you're like, yeah, that really is luck, isn't it? And, like, that's one of the things that's always fascinated me in world history, like, how much of it is luck. Like, why was it that England was able to take over so many nations when they are ostensibly, you know, not further advanced technology, but a lot of it has to do with the coal that was under England. It's luck. And the moments of introspection, thinking about how having that attention of divine entities affects the human mind, were just so deeply interesting. So, like, Phil, at one point in particular, is thinking about how much it makes him paranoid to have, you know, a god suddenly, and how it was almost more reassuring before he got this god involved in his life, because then he knew that all the little things that went wrong were just things that happened. But now that he has a god, any little thing that goes wrong, he's wondering if it's a sign of his own personal failings. And that made me think deeply about the nature of how religious folks in general, especially in the modern world, and especially certain specific religions, they try to assign everything that happens to them to the will of God, and don't acknowledge the idea that God could not be, like, involved in this every single moment, and, like, how in many ways it's a really self-centered way of approaching life. And it ignores the acts and will of other people around them who, you know, maybe God's not punishing you. Maybe God's not punishing this particular person. Maybe God's punishing the person next to you and you just happen to be in the wrong space at the wrong time and get a little bit of overlap. And it can be intensely stressful to think about the world this way. And I admit that this is one of those things I just hadn't really thought about it this way before. And I do love books that present ideas in a very clear story, a very much, we are in the story, I am not telling you to think about this, but hey, think about this. And I love it when it manages to reshape the way I look at the world, which is cool. And on that note, I'm actually very happy that the Judeo-Christian God does not make an appearance in this book. Neither does Jesus, the Virgin Mary, neither does any of the figures of, you know, what I guess you could call the big three of Western religion. And I like that specifically because even though this book is about gods, it's not really about religion. It's significantly more about power. There's no real question of belief here, because the gods they are following are literally there. They can touch them, they can talk to them, they can receive phone calls from them, they can buy them a beer, they can sleep with them. And this isn't a devotional kind of faith that we associate with modern religion. And I'm glad of that, because anytime that anything is about religion, especially if it dares discuss one of the big religions, it tends to become nothing but a discussion of faith. Like, so many times, if Jesus makes an appearance in a book, it's about Christianity, and that's all it's going to be about. Every other theme gets washed under the waves of, was this respectful? Is this acceptable? Should we not do this? Is this going to piss off the Baptists? And I really also just feel like a lot of that discussion has been done to death, and this is doing something completely different, just in the same realms. And in my opinion, it's sort of doing something more interesting, because there's more in here about the way power interacts with itself, and with human life in particular. Like how we give power to entities, and yes, in this book it's gods, but you can extrapolate pretty easily to like religions, but also governments. You can extrapolate to unions. You can extrapolate to anything that we choose to give power to in exchange for its help. And how that's innately transactional, and that ambition often calls for you to give more power away, and you're just gambling that it will come back to you in some way. And like, that's a really interesting way to look at it. And there's also some really interesting things going on here with the concept of responsibility. And like, I feel like it's really low-hanging fruit to talk about responsibility when it comes to, you know, gods. But this is not just like the, ooh, with great power comes great responsibility, Spider-Man kind of thing. No, this is more talking about the responsibility to help each other and to do as little harm as possible, both when you have power and when you don't. There's a moment in the end where one character basically has no power whatsoever, and yet they still ride off to rescue, knowing that they are probably just throwing their lives away. But it ends up working out so that, yeah, their appearance does make a difference. It does save someone, and it gives them the cathartic moment of being able to strike back against a power that they shouldn't have basically had any ability to hurt. And even though it is sort of, you know, punching a wall, there is something about that feeling. The feeling alone is worth it sometimes. Sometimes all you can do is shout at the heavens, even if you know that shouting at the heavens might get you struck by lightning. It's still worth it sometimes. And also, I like the fact that that moment, even though she had very little power there, it still did sort of save the day. It's one of an accumulated thing that saves the day, but it helps. And I personally really like that message. I also really love how much this book is really thinking about how immortality might change a sentient being, or not change them throughout a long stretch of time. Like, the gods are almost constantly talking about how brief human life is, and specifically they're super dismissive about how humans waste their time when they have so little of it, while they themselves are sitting around watching TV or playing board games for eternity. And like, some of them have changed drastically since the early days of existence, and some of them haven't. And I feel like there's something really interesting going on with that. And that's one of those things I feel like I need to think about more. It hasn't fully solidified in my mind. But I do think it all centers around the character of Quick. And Quick was by far my favorite character in this entire book. He's really the moral center of the book, and he's in many ways more human than all the other gods, and in many ways more than any of the humans in this book. And part of that I'll get to in a minute, but he feels this really deep, great regret for what he was, and has spent centuries basically refining himself, reforming who he thinks he should be. And like, he's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but he often like is not wanting to get involved, but he's willing to step up. And it just makes him a really interesting character. But I did say that I think he comes across as more human than a lot of the human characters in here, and this is the one reason that I was a little bit less effusive about this book in the beginning. The reason that I found myself not as drawn into it as I expected to be was this was a book that was pretty much one where every minor character is more interesting than the main characters. And I know it was on purpose. Like, this is not a mistake. This is not a flaw. This is a mechanic of the book. The main characters, Terry and Phil, are meant to be the most suburban, white bread, boring-ass couple in the universe. And that's the point, because so much of the book is really about how these really normal people's lives have value and are worth fighting for, and that they will fight even though they are super normal and they have pretty much no power to do so. They will still fight because that is an innate part of humanity. But that also meant that there just wasn't really much for me to latch onto with these characters in the early part of the book. They both pick up a bit more personality as the story goes along, but so much of the personality is really just an actually wholesome version of every sitcom couple you've ever met. They love each other. Phil wants to protect Terry. Terry is slightly annoyed by Phil's assumption she needs protection. Phil likes to play video games. Terry was into protests in college. And they have a mortgage. They have 2 cars. They have office jobs. And I'm just like, okay, cool. Cool. And like I said, I know this is on purpose. Them being slightly cliche everyman is the concept of the book here. But it was just a bit hard for me to connect with them, especially considering the version of everyman, every suburban couple that, like, has ever existed, is something that I grew up seeing on TV and being taught that that is the norm, and it has nothing to do with my personal life. Like, it's one of those norms I'm looking at it going, yeah, that's, I guess, normal? So it did not work quite as much as a cipher for me as I suspect it would work for a lot of people who live slightly more normal lives, who do have the mortgage and the car and the office job and the marriage and whatever. But other than that, the other main character here is Lucky. And he's fun. He's the kind of character I do tend to get attached to. He's disastrously carefree. He's dangerously charismatic. He has a heart of gold under a very thick coat of selfish lack of empathy. He's fun. And, like, the bad guy was also pretty straightforward, big bad guy character. Like, he really is a slightly cliche bad guy. But I really liked the mix of petty nastiness with the cold-hearted evil. Like, the pettiness of him added a depth to it that I feel like otherwise could have made him a boring character. And because of that, he came across as fun. There's also a villainous high priest character who is another character that felt a little bit hollow, but once again, he's a character that's meant to feel hollow. He is meant to feel like Kristen Bell's character in American Psycho. And yeah, that's who he is. And I got an ending that fit the character perfectly, and because of that, it also felt a little bit hollow. But this all is like, it's all working conceptually within the book, but it all made the characters a little bit standoffish for me, if that makes sense. But Sif was the character I wanted to talk about probably the most when I wanted to write this. When I started reading the book, as soon as I started reading it, Sif was the character that I was like, this is the one I want to talk about. And she's annoying. She's terrible. She is so bad. And I do sort of hate the fact that she's the classic cliche of a woman having gone bad over a guy. Like, I do wish she had a different motivation, just because that one's a little bit done to death. But everything about her is fascinating except for that. I feel like we get this really interesting character from her. And also, to counter the fact that everything about her centers around guys, we have a lot of other female characters that don't really. Like, yes, all of them have connections to guys, and a lot of them are dragged into this story by guys, but like, Janet is just a great character all around. I love all of her interactions with Sif, and mainly because she was so clearly just straight up saying, I refuse to play into this cliche. I refuse to make my life about your fight over this guy. But what I wanted to talk about Sif's character more than anything else is I'm pretty sure that I'm supposed to hate Sif. Like, that is a very clear thing to me. But I'm also pretty sure that she works as a direct metaphor for depression. She comes into a random woman, Bonnie's, life without any invitation. Bonnie can't get rid of her on her own, and trying to get help may take too long for Bonnie to survive it. And, like, Sif is this constant weight on her, turning everything to shit around her. But Bonnie is determined to fight back. And it forces her to accept a certain amount of crap and chaos and to just roll with it and just to accept that her apartment's always cold and there are always these strangers around and yeah, the magazines suck now. But the fact that she is willing to fight even through all this gives us faith that she will get out from under it from the very beginning. And now the metaphor does really start to fall apart a little bit when Sif starts getting distracted and directing her energies toward a wider population, because at least in my experience, making people around you suffer doesn't usually help depression lessen up. But also, you could sort of take that as a metaphor for community somewhat unwillingly taking on the burden of depression on their shoulders by, you know, being the people who step up and listen and help you, like, commiserate and to help you feel less crappy. But I also just love the fact that Bonnie still refuses to give in to the desire to be a worse person because of Sif. Even while Sif is this weight on her, cursing her life, and directly telling her, you'll probably die because I'm here, she still refuses to, like, basically pass Sif off on anyone else. She's only willing to do it when it spreads out and it doesn't hurt everybody as sincerely. And I love the fact that she does get out from under it in the end. And especially considering the mood I was in, I needed to read that. And all of that was one of the strongest parts of this book to me. And objectively, Bonnie's not that major of a character. She's a cool character, but she's not the biggest one. But overall, I really liked this book. I think I'm going to be thinking about it for quite a while, still dissecting different elements, chewing on bits, thinking it over. And even though I wasn't as head over heels with the characters as I was the characters in the last A. Martinez book I read, I still really liked it. And there were enough characters in here that I really cared about that kept me in the book. And overall, if you're someone who's into comedic but slightly thoughtful fantasy, examining power, humanity, love, and responsibility, this is a great book for you. Especially if you like raccoon gods, because I will admit the raccoon god really helped it for me. I do enjoy raccoons.